Welcome to the Select Committee today. Look, you've got 10 minutes with us for your submission, but take your submission as read and we'll hand it over to you to talk us through your main points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm just introducing myself. I'm Bryce McKenzie. I don't know if Laurie Patterson's here. I can't see anybody else on the screen. He is going to be here. He is also, with him and I, were the co-founders of Groundswell. And we have Jamie McFadden, who is our environmental spokesman, who will be doing most of the speaking. But perhaps if I can just start off by saying we were pretty disappointed that with an email base of over 80,000 and a massive social media following that we missed the cut to be able to do a decent presentation. This seems pretty short-sighted when we consider other groups representing agriculture had at least 3 hours and possibly longer with having input into the bill initially. So we're pretty disappointed in that. But however, here we are. So for a coalition government who campaigned on removing regulations, we have some suggestions for you on how to do that. For myself, I'm a member of the award-winning nationally recognised Pomahaka Water Care Group. We're a group of volunteers who have achieved over 50% of people in our catchment being members of our group. Now, this is just done by encouraging people to take an interest in their catchment. With what we've done is basically we started water testing back in 2015 to understand where we needed to put our energies. Once we found out what our main problems were, the next step was to, of course, work out how we could rectify those problems. Now, we've managed to come a long way in that time and have won a number of awards for what we've done. One of the other things we did, which we found worked really well, is we started up a best practice response team, and they have their own hotline. Now, that receives many calls and is followed up by members of the water care group, and we get people reporting any breaches of best practice, and it is well used. One question we do have, and we've discussed it a bit, is why a catchment with good water quality needs to have bureaucratic farm plans which give far more stress for no real gain. So if you want to get rid of some regulations, we have some suggestions for it, and I'll pass it over to Jamie to follow up.
Okay, I'm just going to go through some of the key points in our submission. And we started off with the international research from out of the UK and just some key points from that. And it was around the dramatic rise of local-led restoration across the world as people have lost faith in the state's ability to provide environmental.
Oh, you're breaking up a bit there, Jamie. We're struggling to hear you.
What we're seeing is top-down approaches across the world are increasing from that research, the buy-in and empowerment of local. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, better now.
Better now?
Yes.
Yeah. So the third point was that the buy-in and empowerment of local people and communities in environmental restoration is not just a nice to have, but a must to achieve success. The second point I just wanted to make, it's useful to understand the context I bring to the submission. So I'm a hill country sheep and beef farmer. I was one of the first students in 1989 to finish a 3-year university course that included the RMA, 3 years of Environmental Services Chair on Hurunui District Council, and qualified as a Hearings Commissioner. I bring a perspective of working over the past 30 years with hundreds of farmers advising and implementing environmental projects, from the high country mountains to the sea. I live and breathe the environment, the RMA, consents, farm plans, and practical farming in a way that few others experience. So my third point, before the RMA, farmers had government subsidies to clear forests, drain wetlands, and maximise stock numbers. Despite this, many chose an alternative path, the catchment board system. of a trusted partnership of an advisor working with farmers through a rolling farm environment plan that blended conservation with development. The legacy being extensive tree plantings, farmers setting up the QE2 Trust, and 2.8 million hectares of native vegetation on sheep and beef farms, a quarter of our country's total native vegetation. Where else in the world can such an impressive claim be made? And previous submitters have talked about the failure of farm plans. Well, that's simply not true. The success of the Catchment Board farm plan system was that it empowered farmers in environmental sustainability. So that was a huge successful program. Point 4, with the RMA, we relied on rules and consents to manage development. We do not argue that regulation is definitely needed for the likes of water takes, effluent ponds, discharges, many other activities. But relying solely on regulation to protect the environment has proven disastrous under the RMA. 20 years ago, with the dairy boom in full swing, we saw a rapid loss of the remaining Canterbury Plains dryland forest remnants, wetlands, and the pollution of rivers. I approached the irrigation and dairy sectors in North Canterbury, drew up a plan, and set about to successfully implement a system similar to the Catchment Board. It is no fluke that our area of North Canterbury is now seen as environmental leaders with a huge amount of restoration and enhancement, particularly wetlands and waterways. And the stuff we're doing at the moment is just, it's incredible. I mean, the amount of work we're doing. Point 5, Section 6, particularly SNA's landscapes and more recently SASMs, has been a curse on our country, pitting residents against their councils with protests from Northland to Southland over the life of the RMA. The regulatory relief proposal adds more administration, complexity and cost and doesn't deal with the central issue. Section 6 is inherently bad law and needs to go. How can you achieve protection enhancement of natural and cultural values if the planning system penalises those proactive environmental endeavour and turns natural and cultural values into a liability? Freshwater farm plans. No matter how you shape this, many farmers will be worse off under this incredibly ill-conceived policy. It goes against everything this current government promises of reducing red tape, bureaucracy, government oversight and cost. It is particularly galling given the huge amount of industry and grassroots effort going into many different initiatives, including farm environment plans. Groundswell NZ and grassroots farmers support integrated, holistic farm environment plans, not ones just focused on fresh water. And we support these as one of the tools in the toolbox, but they must be industry-led, and a top-down government approach will be met with fierce resistance and will fail. I have been actively involved in many farm plan models over 30 years. My 2 most important messages are: 1, that every farmer and farm is different, and the mix of approaches and tools that work best for each farmer is incredibly varied. One tool, one size fits all doesn't work. Point 2, the key outcome with farm plans is that it must empower farmers in environmental sustainability, that they live and breathe in everything they do. Question: 83% of farmers in a beef and lamb survey oppose mandatory government prescribed freshwater farm plans. How do you expect this policy to succeed with this degree of opposition? Consents. Massive issues with consents, and it's the cost. Many of our clients are $30,000 to $80,000, taking 2 to 4 years for irrigation consent renewals. Previous submitter talked about the role of iwi in consents, and it's just made it more complex and more frustrating for farmers. 7.7. How many catchment type groups, biodiversity trust, weed and pest initiatives are across New Zealand? How many dairy and irrigating farmers are already under a farm environment plan system? Section 32 of the RMA is an excellent planning mechanism, not given genuine attention by councils or central government. How can you develop workable environment legislation if you don't know the current state? Hence, Groundswell NZ's submission that a stocktake of current state is done before progressing the legislation any further. This is also to assess what the threats are to our environment, particularly in weeds and pests. Point 8, last point. Groundswell NZ is incorrectly seen as a protest movement against regulation. Bryce McKenzie's founding principle remains: someone at the forefront of environmental sustainability, Pomahaka Water Care Group, frustrated with the failure of government to not only design workable legislation, but that undermines the environmental work of landowners and communities. Thank you.
Look, thank you very much, Jamie, and a lovely background that you have there on the farm. Look, we don't have time for many questions, but we'll go to Grant McCullum for a question.
G'day, team. Thanks for your submission. Really appreciate it. I'm just curious, you're talking about Section 6 and the whole SNA concept. How, as farming community, how do you then reassure the general public of New Zealand that actually any areas of real natural significance, like particular wetlands, will be taken care of if there's no regulatory oversight? How would you guys go? How could you actually achieve that?
So the first thing is that the rules and the SNA mapping don't protect the SNAs. So we did a presentation to our local council of a whole heap of SNAs around here, like this one behind me.
Yeah.
And we demonstrated that the rules and mapping were not protecting these SNAs, because the protection of SNAs relies on active management, and that active management has to come from farmers. So what they've done in our district is a template for the rest of the country. They got rid of SNAs. There's no mapped SNAs. We've got a biodiversity trust. I'm a founding trustee. We've got the Huronui District Land Care Group. We've got catchment groups, a whole lot of new catchment groups. We've got a whole lot of biodiversity initiatives being rolled out by the community. The council have stepped back and let us get on with it. They support us and they've let us get on with it. You've got to remove natural and cultural values from the legislation. Otherwise, you'll keep having them as a liability. They've got to be an asset.
Thank you.
Yeah, just, Grant, if I can say something about it, particularly addressing wetlands. The wetlands in our catchment have grown, I would hate to think by numerically how many, because when we did trials, we found the only way to remove phosphorus from waterways was to actually be able to stop the water flow and let it drop out. So our wetlands in the Pomahaka catchment, I would say, are probably increased tenfold. So it's just happening naturally if you have an interest in the purity of your water.
Thank you.
Look,
thank you.
Thank you. And just time for one last quick question.
Tiny,
Rachel Brookham.
just tiny question on the photos you've got there and the willows. And you know, I understand the problems with cracked willows, but you're talking about the purple willows as well. On this photo, are these like baby willows or are the willows further out?
I didn't mention this, but this is probably a critical point. I was in a meeting with regional council and a whole lot of ecologists and others, and my gosh, I mean, amongst us, we think this willow weed is the biggest threat we've ever seen in terms of weeds or pests in New Zealand. It's taking over whole brae plains of riverbeds. I had regional council staff, senior staff out there a couple of weeks ago. They couldn't believe it. Whole brae plains. So the Crack River grows on the sides of the willows, of the rivers. It doesn't grow through the middles of the brae plains that much. Whereas this willow, it's a purple willow, it's a shrub type willow. It's taking over whole brae plains of riverbeds. It's so absolutely frightening.
It's this low stuff on the,
yeah. It's all the low stuff in the middle of the photo. So on the left, far left and the far right, you can probably just see some crack willows. Yeah. But all through the middle of that photo, that used to be clear brae plain where river nesting birds used to nest. So that's why we say with the whole legislation, the legislation's almost, it's so far behind what we're dealing with at the coalface here. We're dealing with massive environmental disasters here, deer and pigs, like on this farm here. I mean, it's just out of control, and we've got legislation that's not getting us in front of all this environmental damage that we're seeing.
Okay, thank you very much, Jamie, Bryce, and Laurie. We appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.